You are about to watch a preview of a Cypography film, and if you would like to watch the full film and over 600 others, please head to www.cypography.co.uk and become a member.
So I was first offered my Burghfield ticket in the winter of 2013-2014. The way it came about, there was a mate of mine who had fished the lake in the past, and it was a lake that I was interested in, to be honest, massively interested in. But at the time, I didn't really feel ready for it. But I can remember one day in that winter, I had a phone call off a mate, and he basically said that there was a few syndicate tickets going for the following year. Prior to this, the lake had been owned by Cemex, and a couple of years before, Cemex had sold the lake. And I think for a year or two, there wasn't a syndicate on the lake. It was just a few select people who had fished the lake previously who'd been allowed to fish there. And they had very minimal fishing. You know, the areas they could fish were a bit up in the air. But as I say, a mate of mine who had fished there in the past, he'd been sort of chasing it up, how he could potentially get a ticket. And the one day he rang me up, and he was like, mate, I've spoke to this chap at Burghfield, and they're going to start a syndicate on there next year. There's a few tickets going. Are you interested? As I say, although it was a lake I was massively interested in and really did want to fish at the time, I didn't quite feel ready for it. You know, those kind of opportunities, they just don't come around every day. So that was it. I decided to take the ticket, which started in the April of 2014. My first trip, I actually set up to begin with in the compound swim. Now, this is a swim that commands the central body of the lake. I can remember I turned up quite late that evening. It was probably 7 o'clock after work. We'd been given a map of what swims we could fish and what swims we couldn't, because there was, there were certain areas of the lake at that time that we couldn't fish, you know, restrictions on certain banks and whatever. But as I say, we'd been given this map, and I dropped in the compound swim, which was a swim on the map. I can't remember what number swim it was, but it was an area of the lake that, you know, I knew that time of the year they were likely to be in. It was an area that my mates had caught them from and seen them in it early spring before, and it gave a great view of the open water. So I decided to do my first trip in there. Now, it didn't quite go as planned. I can remember I got in there, and just as I was getting the rods out, a car pulled up behind, and it was a chap. It actually transpired it was Alex, he's a young lad who lives in the house at the end of Searles Farm Lane, and he basically told me that it was not a swim, that they own the land, and I'd have to pack away. To begin with, I wouldn't say a disagreement, but I was a bit baffled. I couldn't understand why I'd been told it was a swim and this lad was telling me it wasn't. But to save the argument, I packed up and moved, and I ended up moving round onto the Rawlins bank. So I actually ended up doing my first night on Burghfield in the scaffold swim. Now, this is a swim, again, that looks out on the open water. A few of my mates had fished Burghfield in the past, so I did know a little bit about it, and from what I'd generally been told, they wake up in that main open water sort of body of the lake, central body of the lake. So I wanted to be able to see that bit of water. So as I say, I've moved into the scaffold, and yeah, I did a couple of nights, and basically I didn't see anything. It was the first weekend in April. I looked both mornings, looked hard, and I just didn't see anything. Didn't really take anything from that trip. I'll be honest, you know, sitting there in the open water, it wasn't really the idea of Burghfield as envisaged. You know, as I say, it didn't really take a lot away from that first trip. I can remember going home that week, and the weather actually improved quite a bit. When I drove down there the following Friday after work, I can remember it was quite warm and muggy, and I thought, I'm not going to sit there again in that open water area. Although, you know, everything I knew about the lake, or what, you know, the very little I knew about that lake was sort of telling me to be in that area. That's where they were likely to wake up. I decided to go and look elsewhere. So for that second trip, I drove straight up to the shallows end of the lake. As I say, it was noticeably a lot warmer that week as well. So I drove up to the shallows, pulled up near to the first shallow swim in the car park. Again, it was getting quite late. It was sort of 7 o'clock, you know, that time of the year, early April. It's probably dark by 7:30, 8 o'clock, so I didn't have a lot of time. So I can remember I actually decided to load the kit straight onto the barrow. I thought I'll take the kit with me. Rather than going for a walk, I'll take the kit with me to save coming back to the car. So I loaded the barrow up and pushed it down the path towards the shallows. And the first swim I came into was the first shallow swim. And I can remember I dropped my barrow down, and as I sort of peered out through the few sort of reeds and that were growing in the edge, I clocked a bit of water movement, and as I looked, I clocked a bit more. It was all scummy and that in the edge, and then I saw a bit of a tail pattern, and the more I looked, I thought, they're carp, they are. You know, they were right up in the corner in probably 2 foot of water, but the problem was with that shallow swim, it's incredibly silty in close, and over the years, the reeds had all grown in, and the swim was pretty much unfishable. So this was the first shallow swim. It doesn't look like a swim now, but this used to be quite a prolific swim, especially in the early spring. They get in this corner a lot. The first place I actually saw Burghfield carp in the water was this swim in April time. I think it was my second trip. They were right in close in front of here. Now, as you can see here, it's quite an awkward swim to fish. It was the same at the time. There wasn't the trees here. But it's really silty, you can't really wade in front of here. So I actually ended up fishing a swim further up the bank, which we're going to walk up to in a minute, and actually caught a couple from there. They've got to pass through that area to get into here. Later on that spring, I did end up catching a few from this swim. I sort of put a load of old logs in here just so I could wade out a bit, and I caught a 30 pounder just off the trees out there. But as you can see, nobody fishes this swim anymore. They've actually made a little swim on the island just here, which we'll see in a minute. But yeah, it's quite a significant corner of the lake. They get in here a lot. The common gets in here a lot as well. Yeah. So that first shallow swim that we just stood in is just round the corner here. And obviously the reason that's not a swim anymore is because they've now made this a swim, this island. This was never a swim while I fished on here, but they've recently put a bridge across, and as you can see, it gives you a much better angle across these shallows. Really nice swim this, to be honest. Yeah, no doubt could do the common. Gets out across these shallows quite a lot. Sort of had an inkling that they were likely to move out of there throughout the course of the night. So rather than drop straight on them, I actually pushed my barrow up to the next swim along the bank, around sort of 80 yards further up the bank. There was a swim called the 30s. Historically, it wasn't the old 30 swim that people will talk about in the past on Burghfield. That swim had actually had a tree falling in it, so again, it was now unfishable. I was actually in the next swim up the bank, but we referred to this as the 30s because it still sort of fished the same area. So this is the actual 30 swim. This is the next swim up the bank from the first shallows. While I was a member, this wasn't actually a swim. There was a big tree, fell across here, it'd been in here years, which obviously made it unfishable. They've recently dragged it out, but you fish this area from the next swim up just here, which is now all overgrown. We'll go up there now, but that's actually where I ended up catching my first couple of Burghfield carp from next door. Good area this. You know, they do come through here a lot when they get onto the shallows. So I ended up fishing this swim here just so I could fish out to the back of those islands there, hoping to intercept them in and out of the shallows. And I had 2 bites off the back of that island. I say off the back. One was off the back of the island, the other one was sort of off that shallow plateau. You can just see off the back of the second island there. can remember once I'd actually dropped in the 30s, I clocked one of the carp from the corner. It sort of bow waved, like it broke off from the corner and bow waved along this series of little islands to the right. And once I was rounding that 30 swim, I could see this little glowing gravel patch just off the corner of the islands down to my left. And I guessed that carp that I'd seen would be patrolling that sort of, you know, the line it was using, it would cross that gravel patch. So I spent quite a bit of time getting a rig on that bit of gravel. It was a really awkward cast. I sort of had to, you know, a bit of a swing round the bushes to the left, but I eventually got a rig there, put a few baits around it. The problem was I spent that much time trying to get that rod out. By now the light was fading rapidly. And I can remember my last 2 rods, I literally took them out of the quiver, and the old pop-ups that were on from the week before, I checked the hooks were fine. I think I gave them a bit of a touch up with a foil. Smelt the pop-ups, they smelt good. I literally put 2 leads on and just chucked the other 2 rods for drops against, there's a couple of islands out in front of you, and I just chucked the other 2 rods for drops off the back of those islands. One was sort of just short of an overhanging tree on the left, off the left-hand island, and the other rod, there was a bit of a shallow plateau that you could see coming off this island. I just sort of off the right-hand island, and I just dropped the rig just on the deep, you know, on the edge of this plateau, just where it dropped a bit deeper. Sticked a dozen or so baits around each rig as the light was fading, and that was it. Rods were out. You know, to be totally honest, although I'd seen a couple of carp, I can't say I felt massively confident. It was just nice to have seen a few. Anyway, went into the night, and I don't know, a few hours into darkness, I caught a tench on the left-hand rod. Now that was a bit of a blow, I'll be honest. That, in my mind, the left-hand rod was the banker rod. Once it was dark, there was no way I was getting a rig on that little gravel spot again. It was such an awkward cast sort of round the corner of the tree. It took me enough attempts in daylight to get it there. So there was nothing I could do with that rod. I just had to hook it up to the eyes, and that was it. Sometime in the early hours, I think it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, I awoke to another tenchy bite on the middle rod. I can remember actually, like, bobbing was going up and down. Oh, flipping it, that's another tench. Anyway, I picked the rod up, and instantly it felt a lot heavier than a tench. Didn't really put up a great fight, just sort of wallowed in. But I could tell I had a carp on the end, and yeah, got it in the net, and it was a massive, like, Simo mirror. Funny enough, it was a mirror that I actually recognised as one my mate had caught a couple of years before. As I say, a couple of my mates had done a bit on Burghfield, and this fish was one of the ones that my mates had caught. It was just under £40, I think it was £39, 10 ounces, which at the time was actually a PV mirror. Not the best looking fish in the world, but I was chuffed. And I can remember, literally just as I was putting that fish in the sack, I was just tying the sack cord up, and the last rod that I had on the rests absolutely busted off. I picked that rod up. Now this fight was a lot more savage. I can remember in the darkness, I could hear it like thrashing over that shallow gravel. It was flat rodding me, trying to get between the islands. And but yeah, I eventually got the better of it, and got that one in the net, and it was a £30 common. Really nice fish. I actually found out later that it was quite a rare fish as well. So yeah, I was absolutely buzzing, as you can imagine. You know, my second trip, and I'd actually had 3 bites, you know, a bite on every rod that night, a tench, a big Simo mirror, and this lovely common. So after those first couple of catches on the shallows, I was actually thinking Burghfield was going to be easy, but in hindsight that couldn't have been further from the truth. Over the next couple of weeks, it warmed up significantly. In fact, I actually saw my first sighting of the common not long after those first captures. I think it was the end of April time. It warmed up quite a bit, and I think I'd actually been fishing in the 30s again. It might have even been the following week after those captures. And it got to about, I don't know, midday. It was red hot, and I can remember I wound in and went for a walk around the dogleg. And as I come round the corner at the bottom of the dogleg, I can remember just clapping eyes on this fish, these fish's shoulders sat out amongst the weed.
Hopefully you enjoyed what you've just seen, and as I said at the start of this video, if you'd like to watch this film in its entirety, please head over to www.cypography.co.uk and join today.